Okay. Today we're really talking about Kovush. But just to introduce it, really in Siman Kuf Hey Halach Aleph. In Siman Kuf Hey, the general rule is that you can't have Blios without heat. That's a general rule. And as we go through Siman Kuf Hey, we're going to see what it is that qualifies as heat. What does that mean that something is hot or not hot? That's its own question, what hot is. But the first din is about, the Siman also has things about ways things can transfer without heat. Okay? And we're going to talk about that. Kovush is going to be one of them. That's today's topic. It's a way things transfer without heat. I don't know if we're going to talk about Malicha, but yes, that's correct. So we talked about other kinds of sort of transfers of time when we talked some time ago about like sometimes you have to do in the Itza or Shif Shuf. So like a transfer, whatever you want to call it, time or not time, a transfer that needs, but there's no heat, but like you cut something and you had some kind of a transfer. Okay. But if you have none of those things, none of these special, I just have to throw out there that the halacha does say, if you have none of those special things, it's not coverage, not any of the other special ways that time can transfer, nothing that needs shift, none of those things is, just rinse it off and you're good. Okay? So if you put a carrot, and you cut carrot with a fleshig knife, just rinse it off and you're ready to go. You don't have to do anything special. You leave something fleishigs in a container for an hour, nothing, you don't have to do anything. That's I know that maybe it's obvious, but anyhow, that's in some kafeh. Okay, that's in the halacha al says that. Okay, but it also tells us what we're really going to talk about is Kovush. I'm going to split myself into two parts. The first part's going to be about regular Kovush, what I call standard Kovush, that we think of like that takes 24 hours. I'm going to talk about that's first half. A lot of those things we talked about way back when we talked about Kalim. So if you remember that back from them from like a zillion years ago, then you could just nod off while I tell you all this. And then I'm going to talk about fast Kovush. Okay? Excuse me. Okay, so we use the word Kovush means to, I don't know what the word means. Soak. Okay, good word.
In conference, like kibush.
That one?
Kovush in land, you're not soaking it.
Okay, so what does it mean?
Kovush means
encompass.
Okay, fine. Okay, that I didn't know that. Okay, fine.
Definitely related.
You're right. Okay.
Liquid typically, or clear than liquid. It's encompass.
Okay, so it means is when you have some kind of a liquid or a solid and a liquid together, and they sit there for a certain amount of time, usually means 24 hours. So like if I put chicken soup in a container and I leave it there for 24 hours, that container is now fleishigs. Okay. So in deciding what's a liquid, you need to have a liquid to do Kovush. In order to have a liquid, so Pri Megadim says words like this.
Well, what about if you have a blob of jelly?
So you're right. I'm about to answer that thing. The Pri Megadim says like this. He says, "Imrach, she iser hamunach besoichem misnanea mimokim lemokim Kovush mikri." Okay, that's he describes when you have Kovush. It's when it's misnanea mimokim lemokim. It can move from place to place, and the place can give examples of honey, oil, and liquefied fat are considered things that are liquid enough to be considered Kovush. And they say the opposite is you have ice or congealed fat or thick honey. Those are not Kovush. Okay, those are just examples that place can give.
Fat is more similar to jelly, I think.
Right, it's like jelly. That's great. That's like a jelly. It's not misnaneh mokum mokum. If you just,
what's the shot? Why it has an impact on content? Why would it not be Kovush?
I don't know how Kovush works. It doesn't mean
with a liquid puts pressure.
Put pressure on the spot where it is.
Only on the spot where it is.
So it's not let it be transferred.
It's just the weight. This is more than the weight. It's putting pressure because the liquid wants to push away and go down.
No,
well, I like my answer better, which is I like my answer better. I have no idea how it works. I don't know how it works. So it is. Life is what it is. I have no idea. Make it up. Okay. Okay. I'll mention now. I meant to say it before. There's two kinds of Kovushes that we're not going to talk about. That are different types of things. One is that if you soak raisins in water for 3 days, it makes raisin juice and becomes wine. It has a din of wine to it. And there's another din of 3 days, which is something called machnis alakim, which is when wine sits in a container for 3 days, even if it's not consecutive days. 3 days of time has special din for hilchos kliya in wine.
There's a shita that Kovush is 3 days.
There is such a shita. That's correct. Not in this world, but I'm saying we don't pass like that. So yes, there's such a shita. Yes. Okay. Okay. Most people hold that Kovush happens even if the things are moving around in the container. So if you have a truck a tanker that's driving around and the liquid is sloshing around back and forth in the truck, that doesn't stop the Kovush from happening. But that's only true if it's.
Who are you? Like what level?
So that's I'm talking about it. This is not like earlier sheetas. This is all.
No, the times could you have an eight or put the agitator.
So that wouldn't help.
That would not have. That's correct.
But basically, who's arguing that those that say that you can do it?
Yes. So being as I'm just summarizing what I said back then, we have to open. I don't have the footnotes are cut out of this part, so we can go back and look over there. Okay. I don't remember who's who. But on the other hand, it has to be the same. It has to be the same liquid moving around. So if you have stuff going through a pipe, so if you have a pipe that has liquid running through it all the time, then we say even though it runs for 24 hours, we say there's not Kovush because it's not the same liquid sitting in for 24 hours. In the truck, the same stuff is sitting, it's just moving back and forth, or his agitator is on. But if it moves through a pipe, it can move through a pipe for a week straight. It doesn't make it Kovush.
So I wonder if an agitator would help for Nisad Rabbanan.
Because
if there's such a shita, a viable shita out there for Nisad Rabbanan, I wonder if it will work.
no, we just this is just what we do. Okay, well, I can look you up the names later. I don't remember who's who. Okay, so an example of this thing about running through a pipe comes up when you make chalav Yisrael. A lot of the people who make chalav Yisrael milk do it in places that usually make chalav stam, and the storage tanks that hold milk, they're just meant for cold. They're not really easy to kasher, quite difficult to kasher them. Like with what?
You know, cerebral?
They're not meant to handle the heat that you would take to do a real kashering. So they have spray bowls to clean them. It can be cleaned to their standard of clean, but they're not good enough to kasher what we would want to do for kashering it. So sometimes you can get the milk in and out in 24 hours, less than 24 hours. You say, okay, we're going to do it in 20 hours. We'll make sure the chalav Yisrael is out in less than 20 hours, so we're good. Okay, but if that works, then that could work. But that doesn't always work. That's not always practical. So they have this eitzah, which is after 20 hours, they drain the milk out of the bottom and pump it right back into the top. And so Rosh Hashanah said, that's fine. He was happy with that. He said, so they took it out of the container, they put it in. It's as if different milk came into it. So there's no Kovush.
Cut the whole thing out at the same time?
So they don't do it. What they do is they pump it out, and there's a whole mathematical formula to figure out how to pump it out. What I'm saying, you pump it out. So let's say it does 50 gallons a minute, okay, and there's 1,000 gallons in there. So you pump out every minute, you're taking out 50 gallons, and then there's a cheshbon. You need a cheshbon because if you pump it back in top, now some is new milk and some is old milk coming out of the bottom. It's a mikvah shayah. Yes, it's a mikvah shayah. Correct. A what? Yeah. So it's a mikvah shayah, and there's a we went to a mathematician to give us a formula for it. Really, he.
Well, you want to figure out that everything came out.
Actually, they said Roiv has to come out. That was
Right.
Correct. No, you can't get everything. If I remember correctly, and this was the case with this professor gave it to his students as a exam. It was part of their exam. He didn't tell them that he was trying to do mikvahs or that it was milk. But anyhow, okay. So yeah, that was.
Basically, it boils down to a certain amount of time to pump us around.
Correct, a certain amount of time. Yes, correct. So it has run a certain amount of time. Rebelsky did not believe in this. He said that doesn't make any sense. He says, why do you think the container is just the tank? He says if you attach a pump and a pipe to it, so now the container is this whole getup. No. This container, it means a pump together with the pipe. It's all one big container.
It's a new container.
Now you just agitate.
So you just agitate it. You just move the stuff around in the.
It went out.
So how do you define?
No, it went out. It didn't go out. It went in. Went from the left side to the right side.
That's right. That's it. You could look.
Because you added a piece. Because you're saying it wasn't there the whole time. Okay.
So let's say if I had a tank that was shaped, I had a tank that had a shape. I made it out of one piece of metal and had a shape of arms coming out and going back up to the top, and I agitated. Then it wouldn't be good.
If there was liquid, the whole thing.
Yeah,
the
was
whole
it there?
contraption.
Was the valve was closed? Yeah,
Right. They're saying it's the whole time it was closed. So for the first 20 hours it was closed, and now we
So
stuck this piece on.
I made a shape of a tank like this, right?
And
a valve and stuff built into it, and then I opened it and I moved it around.
Uh-huh.
Okay, anyhow, the Chol Yisrael world does it Rav Shachter's way. They assume that if you do this whole shtick, then you're okay, and you're.
Did anyone else weigh in besides these two Bitul?
Whoever makes Chol Yisrael thinks about this. Whoever makes Chol Yisrael in a not Chol Yisrael place.
You thought about it in passing, or
I don't know names. No, that I don't know. Okay, it takes usually 24 hours to do.
So if someone's particular about Chol Yisrael and holds that Chol Stam is a tzir, so he has a serious issue here.
Well, he's counting on his Rav Mashir to take care of it.
So he should know this.
So some people make sure it's out.
On the side of the valve,
Some of them make sure that it's out in less than 24 hours. I have a different way of dealing with it. I make sure it's out in 24 hours. Yeah, it's a
Consumer might want to find out what the policy
Okay, no problem. Okay, anyhow, now it usually takes 24 hours to do Kovush. The one exception is that if you have tzir, something very salty, tzir means fish brine, but it's something very salty, then it happens in a few minutes. And in the second half of today, I'm going to talk to you about what that fasting is. The short version is that it's something between 6 and 18 minutes. Okay, so it's very short, a couple of minutes. So if you're making, actually the Kovush thing also, but you're making cheese. Part of the way you make cheese, some cheeses have to be brined. That means they sit in a very salty mixture for days or weeks. They sit for a long time in that stuff. So if you want to put cheese into a brine tank, and the brine tank was treif, or was not Kovush, then you have to kasher that tank, or you have to line the tank. Okay, now the truth is, we'll probably sit there for 24 hours anyhow. But even if not, even a couple of minutes sitting in there will be enough to make it Kovush. Okay, and make time transfer in things that are tzir, in a very salty brine. What?
What do they line up with?
Swimming pool liners. Yeah, big plastic bag. Basically, a big plastic bag. Okay. Anyhow, so the reason why they line it sometimes is because they're made out of cement and you can't catch them. Okay.
Drums always have their liners.
Right, but those are little, drums.
Huh?
Yeah, plastic drum.
Not the melon drums.
Okay, so the Mechaber goes a step past that and says not only is that true for tzir, it's also true for charif, like vinegar. The Shach says it's not correct. He argues on that. The Magen Avram, switch to Aruch. The Magen Avram says you should be machmir like the Mechaber in cases when it's a strong vinegar and not when it's a weak vinegar. Okay, just as an aside, we guess what that means is. He doesn't say what it means. What's a strong vinegar and a weak vinegar? This is just a guess. We have no idea if this is what it really means. Is that when you make vinegar out of wine, it comes out at vinegar is a liquid that has acetic acid in it. If you look at home in your vinegar, it says 5% acetic acid. Okay, so when you make vinegar out of, let's say, wine, the amount of acetic acid is give or take the same amount as there was alcohol. So if you start with a wine that's 12% alcohol, you're going to end up with vinegar that's 12% acetic acid, give or take. Okay, but what?
See the Kashrus awareness video this week.
What did you say? Did I say it in there? I don't remember if I said that. But, so that's it comes out whatever vinegar you make, you have to make it out of alcohol. Whatever it usually give or take, it's about the same amount of percentage of acetic acid. But then you dilute it down. They dilute it down to 5% that you want to eat in your house. That's considered acceptable for eating. 12% is too strong for people. Okay, so this is just a guess that the strong vinegar he's talking about is the way it comes out when you actually produce it. It comes out like 12-13%. But then the way you'd use it in your house is the weaker vinegar, the kind that you eat in your house.
This was historically, they always did it.
The idea that we made 5%.
They had a high percentage, and they watered it down as needed.
Right. So the strong vinegar would be the way it comes out naturally. But when you want to eat it, you water it down. So when he describes two kinds of vinegars, a strong vinegar and a weak, it's just a guess. Well, what is it? He doesn't say what he means. You know what I mean? Okay. Anyhow, but those are both natural things. It naturally comes out at 12%, and it's for using in your house. Everybody uses it 5%. So that's a guess. Anyhow. But the Mishnah Berurah says, you could be makel against the Magen Avram. So the Magen Avram, the Magen Avram was saying the Mechaber only meant to buy the strong vinegar. The Mishnah Berurah is saying you could makel on that, and that's what most American hashgachas do. They assume that not like the Mechaber about vinegar and not about davar charif, and therefore even a davar charif doesn't have coverage until it's 24 hours. And right. So and the big nafkamina means is like if you have a filling machine. So in a filling machine, usually stuff's not going to sit there for 24 hours. We can make sure it doesn't sit for 24 hours. It usually does sit for 6 to 18 minutes. Right? That's very normal at all. So because we're saying that you don't care about quick coverage for davar charif, means you don't have to worry about that filling machine. It could have treif vinegar and kosher vinegar. As long as you make sure it never sits for 24 hours, then you're good. There's no Blios in that thing. Okay.
Just the girls, if you stick a flesh in a spoon into your frame for 10 to 18 minutes.
Right, okay, that's the same thing also. That's true also. Yes. Okay. Okay, now usually when you have coverage that takes 24 hours, it's only a din l'chatchila, because b'diavad, by the time the coverage happens, it takes 24 hours for Blios to come out. So the thing, you weren't supposed to do it, but by the time it happens, it's already from a kli. Yes, I'm sorry, from a kli, not from a food. Yes, I should have said that, from a kli. But it usually takes 24 hours. But in here, a davar charif is different. Okay, because even though we don't hold like the mechaber, like about a davar charif making a quick coverage, but mechayel shvach, which we talked about once, mechayel shvach is still true. So it'll be mechayel shvach. So if it sits for 24 hours, even though it's ein ben yomer, it'll make the food treif b'diavad. Okay, those people confuse those two together. They're not connected to each other. Okay. Last about that part is Kovush makes a blia go through the entire thickness of a kli. So if a piece of metal is a half an inch thick, it will go through the entire half inch, the whole thickness of that. So if you're thinking about Bitul and Kashering and things like that, it goes through the whole thickness. But it doesn't go above the product line. So if the tank was 80% full, the blia only goes to that line till the 80%. It goes the full thickness of the kli, but not the full height of the kli. Only to the height where the food was in. If the top 20% has no blia in it at all, except if it's a davar shami. Okay, for normal things it doesn't happen. Okay, now let's move to one last part, which I'm also going to do quickly before we get to the fast coverage, and that is how to kasher if the coverage. So the Shach says that there are 4 special cases where Kovush, we say Kovush only happens k'dei klipa. Usually Kovush is k'dei kulei. 4 things that are Kovush is on k'dei klipa, and they are chametz before Pesach, stam yayin, kosher meat or kosher milk. Okay, basically cases of heter, things that are sort of heter, and stam yayin. These 4 cases have a special din that is on k'dei klipa. For those 4 cases, it's clear that the way you kasher for them is miluv irui. Okay, miluv irui, you fill it up for each time for 3 days, for 24 hours, however that works. Okay, and you can do other things because the blia is on k'dei klipa. There's special ways you could kasher it.
So it's like a bitul sauce.
Yes, it's negated for bitul also. Correct. Yes, but the miluv irui does not work for a kovush of a regular isser. Okay, not one of these 4 special ones. It doesn't work for miluv irui. Doesn't work for them. Okay, so what do you do to kasher after kovush of a regular isser? Let's say there's something just treif that was a kovush. How do you kasher it? So the Shach says you should kasher it with hagola gemura. Okay, so everybody who reads that says hagola gemura sounds like full kashering, right? Do a full hagola, roischin, do the whole trick, do the whole thing. And if you're doing it at home, no problem. So that's what you do. You do hagola gemura. That's what everybody who reads this would say. Hagola gemura means you do a full kashering. But like if we talk about like these milk tanks that I talked to you about, right? Remember, if the guy's kashering from chol stam to chol v'shol, he's treating the chol stam as treif. So it's not practical. Okay, it's not realistic to do. I'm not saying impossible, but very difficult to do hagolat roischin in a tank like that. So it's not. It can't handle the heat.
You certainly can't do it with a cleavation.
No, it's extended.
So right. So that's fuzzy.
Okay,
that's fuzzy.
You're ready coming out the
right. That's correct. That's fuzzy. That's fuzzy. That's fuzzy where that works also. But it's something not so good about this over here. Okay. So there's a reason to be makel. Okay, and the reason to be makel is a combination of a tzir of 4 different things going on over here. Okay, and they are. The first is this kind of a tank, by its nature, I'm telling you, it's a tank that only holds cold. It's always going to hold things that are cold. So that means is the food will always be mutter b'diavad. Okay, because by the time the blia comes out, I just told you a second ago, it'll be ene ben yomer. So the food will always be mutter b'diavad. That's one good piece of good news. Second piece of good news is that usually the size of these tanks, again, we're talking in a commercial tank, is the amount of metal versus the amount that it holds means that it's asur l'shtamish b'shefa. The blia is always going to be balta b'shishim. It's so big that the blia is always going to be balta b'shishim. And many hold that asur l'shtamish b'shefa is mutter without kashering at all. You could use it without kashering at all. Okay, and some of the people who are machmer say if it's ene ben yomer, that also counts. That's a question also, but at least there's what to talk about here. Okay. Third is there's a Achronim talk about whether Kovush does anything into metal. It could be that Kovush doesn't work at all into metal. Okay, back to the first discussion we had over here. There's the debate going on here. We understand how like Kovush could work into wood, like sort of seeps into it, but into metal, you think it doesn't penetrate it at all. So there's some Achronim hold there's no Kovush at all into metal. And then the last is that the Pri Megadim says 2 things, which I'm not going to tell you today. He says 2 things, and if we put them together, it could be he's trying to say is if you kasher with yad tzedis boy, that's good enough if the covers. So that means is what the Shach said Hagala Gemura, he really meant is the extremes of Yad Tzedis boy, and since we say Yad Tzedis boy is the L'chumra 165, 175, something like that, so therefore we could put all these things together and say, as you know, if we have a tank like this, in fact that's a serious house. If a tank like this that needed to be kashered from Kovush, from one of the other Isurim, you could do it at 165, 175 as a tzir for all these things together. That's well, trying for harder is like it's sort of impossible. I'm saying it's not.
If it's impossible, then it's what you do. But let's say you can handle higher.
It's typically impossible.
An accent.
Yes,
huh?
Yes. If it can handle harder, yes, of course we would want to do that. But tanks that are meant just for cold, by their nature, that's not how they're built. And actually, a good chance of ruining the tank to do it at a high temperature. So, okay. Now let's move to fast covers. Okay, Adkan regular covers. So in regular covers, the first thing, this is the calmer part. In regular covers, the Ramah is pretty clear that Kovush he holds is a din deraisa. Okay, the fact that Kovush works is deraisa. The Ramah says if you have a shaila about something, a suffix about Kovush, you should be machmir, except if it's basa b'cholav, because basa b'cholav, Kovush or basa b'cholav is only the Rabbanan. It's only the Rabbanan that you can't eat milk and meat that weren't cooked together, but just Kovush together. So he says then you could be mekel. So that's pretty clear that he holds that regular Kovush is deraisa. Prelim Gam says, I'm not really sure whether the fast Kovush that I'm going to talk to you about now, about this tzir working really quickly, whether that's also deraisa. He says, but Lamaisa, none of the poskim say one should be different than the other, so I'll assume that it's deraisa. Okay, it's not clear, but then he says I'm not really sure. Okay, there's another machlekes, which is whether fast Kovush has anything to do with kalim, or maybe it's only to do with foods. Maybe only when just foods. If I have a pickle sitting in vinegar, then the Kovush happens between them. If we have cheese sitting in a brine tank, then the Kovush would happen quickly between the tzir and the brine and the cheese. But what happened to kalim was also machlekes. So the Mishnah says you should be machmir about that also. He says, but b'makom hefsid you could be mekel, okay, which is a big nafkamina. Again, he's saying you could be mekel to say fast Kovush doesn't happen to kalim. B'makom hefsid you could be samach on those.
Anyway.
What? No, for tzir. For tzir, so that everyone holds that as fast Kovush for tzir. That's what we're talking about now for tzir. So like for cheeses, if it was put into the wrong tank, so the Mishnah says, but Malcolm Hefsed, you could be mekel that there's no fast Kovush for those things. So it will be less than 24 hours. Okay.
He's not machmer anything other than tzir.
Well, we're in general only machmer for fast Kovush for tzir, but the shayla does tzir make a difference for kalim also? So he says yes, you should be machmer like it does. Most of the people who are mekel is Ataz, Ashach, and the Ramah are all mekel about that. There's no Kovush. The fast Kovush doesn't happen to kalim. Mishnah says you should be machmer, but he said the Malchus said you could be mekel. So which would be negate to a mistake. Okay. So what's this time? What is this? How does it happen, or how quickly does it happen? So the Mechaber says it should be Shah Kadesh Yitnenu ala Or V'Yarsiach V'Yasra Lehispashal. Okay. It should you put it onto as if it's on the fire. How much time it would take if it was on the fire in order to heat up and start to cook? Okay, so where did that come from? Like, what is that din that?
It's the amount that was in the kli.
What did you say?
If he took a small kli, he got there in 3 minutes.
So I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. I'm going to get to in a second. I'm not going to answer your question, but I'm going to just talk about it in a second. But this idea of sheyas lasich is not a gemara. It doesn't come from where it comes from a rush. The gemara doesn't say anything like this. So what it is like this? The gemara says is that when you do malicha for meat to get the blood out, when you do malicha for meat, you should do it in a kli menukov. And the reason why you do it in a kli menukov is because when you do malicha, this blood is supposed to be coming out. The blood comes out. If you have a kli that has no holes in it, the blood's going to sit on the bottom, and the meat is going to be sitting in the blood. So the blood that came out is the treif. It's treif, and that meat is sitting in the treif blood. So the Gemara says you shouldn't leave it in a kli that has no holes in it, because or else the blood will just sit there on the bottom. Now I don't know if the Gemara says it, but the Gaonim say that if you did it, the meat would be treif. Okay, I don't know if that's a Gemara that says that the meat is treif. I didn't find the Gemara that said that the meat is treif. The Gemara says don't do it. The Rosh says, but the Gaonim said, and if you did it, the meat would be treif also. So
you resalt it to get it out.
No, you can't resalt. No. You can't do malicha again. No, too late. Okay, so the some said now that that's so far we're safe. The Rosh says that okay, but how long did it have to sit in this kli she'eina menukov to become treif? Some said it had to sit there for the full amount of time that it takes for malicha. Malicha takes 18 minutes. That's the ikar din. We do it for longer, but the ikar din is it takes 18 minutes. So if it sits for the whole amount of time malicha, it becomes treif. And Rabbeinu Tam says no. Even if it's there for a second, it's treif. Okay, so we have these two shittas. One is that if it sits there forever, it sits there the whole zman malicha, it's treif. And Rabbeinu Tam says even if it's there for a second. The Rosh says ani omer like divrei zeh like divrei zeh. Okay, I don't think either of these are right. Okay, and the reading of it sound, at least to me, sounds like he's giving a compromise. It does not sit there for 18 minutes. It also is not if it's there for a second. So what is it? So the Rosh says, look at the Gemara right before this. The Gemara right before this Gemara that says don't put into a kli she'eina menukov says like this. It says, you know this line, maliach karisech and kavush k'mavushal. Okay, maliach, if something sits with salt, it's karisech, it's like it's hot, and kavush is k'mavushal. He says, so listen to the wording of the Gemara. Kovush k'mavushal. If it soaks in something for a long amount of time, it's k'mavushal. I mean, the blia goes all the way through. Maliach is k'reseach. Reseach only makes a blia k'dei klipa. Okay, so the Gemara is differentiating between maliach makes a blia happen k'dei klipa, kovush makes a blia happen k'dei kula. So he says like this: when meat sits in salt, if the meat sits in the salt, in the salty mixture for a short amount of time, it'll be just k'reseach. It'll be like hot, and it'll only be a k'dei klipa. If you want the blia to be k'mavushal, then you have to be kovush. It has to be sit there in a way that's kovush. He says now kovush doesn't mean an hour. Doesn't have to sit 24 hours like it usually does. What it is like this. He says v'shir kvisha. So what's the kvisha? Remember, it's a compromise between instantly and 18 minutes. What's the kshir? Ki'ilu nasan hala'ar kadei sher siach v'yas l'vashal. And my understanding was it means like this. If maliach is k'reseach, if salt is like it's hot, so then imagine now this piece of meat is now on something hot. The salt is as if it's heat. So just like if there'd be a fire here, once it got it hot, it would make blia transfer. In the amount of time, let's say it take a few minutes to get it hot, then time would transfer. So to here also, the salt is as if it's hot. If it sits for long, then it makes the time transfer. So Kovush K'mavushal doesn't take 24 hours. Kovush K'mavushal doesn't even take 18 minutes, like some shitas held. But it takes is as if, imagine the salt is being hot, because it's maliach is karesech, the salt is hot, and now the hot salt, as if a fire over there is spreading, making the other thing hot, and then time can transfer from a bushel. Okay, so that's something not instantly, because the heat doesn't work instantly, and it's also not 18 minutes, it's something in between there. Okay, so, and that's how I understand what the Rosh is talking about. I'm skipping some parts over here. Now, the Daki Tshuva talks about David's Shiloh. He says, okay, should we say we're saying it's supposed to be, is it a small fire or is it a big fire? He says, should we imagine that the pot is covered or it's uncovered, right? If it was sitting on the fire, would we cover the pot or we wouldn't cover the pot? Another one he says, are we talking about...
The fire is as big as the amount of liquid of kvisha. It's all fire.
So pretend that it's all fire.
Yeah.
Okay, so you think that. And what about the cover? And what should we put a cover on this pot?
How cold was it beforehand?
What?
How cold was it beforehand? And what about, he says, should we think that there's water in the pot or there's just the food being heated by itself? And there's a bunch of other shilas like this. And Bali Shulchan says, he says, okay, we got all these shilas here, but how it works, all these kind of shilas. He says, so how in the world could someone say it takes 6 minutes? How can you come up with, how can it be a flat shear? He says, the 18 minutes is not correct, but at least we can understand that, because the 18 minutes was the chumrah that the Rosh was going in.
Saying not 18
minutes. Saying not 18 minutes. Okay, but for sure in 18 minutes this can happen. Okay, that we got. It's for sure with less than 18 minutes. But how could someone say 6 minutes? It's like what does that mean? That's what in Balish says. If all these shilas makes you realize it can't be a set amount of time. Okay, but Lamai says some Acharonim say 6, and we work with that. But 6 to 18 minutes. And then there's another question, which is
so what's the 6 to 18?
Well, some say 6 and some say 18. So,
because not like the Rosh, because the other Shita.
No. Some of the Acharonim say, but Kishiyama Ishvayasiyach means 18 minutes. They say that's what it means, which it's hard to believe that's what it really means, right? It's hard to
mean 18. That he's not arguing.
Right. So it's hard to believe that's what. But that's all like the end. I don't remember the names. It's like the end of the amount. It can't be more than 18 minutes, right? That's sort of like our cutoff. Okay, and then we have just another type of a question, which is when we say. Let me just tell you something else before I tell you the question. Rosh Hashanah once explained how he thinks Liban Kal works. Okay, the Liban Kal, you put a thing on a fire and you wait until it's Yatzles on the other side. Okay, right? Let's do Kashering this table. If it was metal, I put fire on this side, and when it gets Yatzles from the other side, that's when Liban Kal has been completed for certain types of Liban Kal. And he explained it. It means it's like this: we want the fire to penetrate the whole kli. So as soon as it's Yatzles on the other side, it means the fire has penetrated, the heat has penetrated all the way through. Now that's considered kasher. Okay, that's just how we explain conceptually what's going on here. So over here, I told you means that we'll pretend the salty brine is like fire until it heats up the whole food. Now that's when the time transfers. So just the question is that, well, shouldn't it then? So in the case of the Liban Kal, it's a kula. When I get the heat all the way through, it's so through that I ensure all the bli is gone. Over here, it's a chumrah, which is when it gets hot, that's when the blia transfers. So let's say it takes 6 minutes to get the whole thing hot, okay? But why shouldn't we say after 3 minutes, it's half treif? because it's a chumrah here to say the heater is. Okay, maybe it was so complicated. Well, I'm not clear myself. Anyhow, but there's all these vague questions, really, like David started saying. And the Daki I told you a few of his shilas. There's more of them. All kinds of shilas of how we make. It's a very vague term. Like, what are we supposed to mean with that?
Do we say likewise that it doesn't go higher than the level of the liquid? By this
phase coverage, yes,
yeah.
Same thing. That part is the same. But Lamaisa, I'm not sure it makes such a difference because when we know that the cutoff is 18 minutes, between 6 and 18 minutes, things don't usually sit for 2 minutes or 5 or 8 minutes, and we caught it just at the right time in this tzir. The whole idea of something sitting in tzir is not such a usual case. So is it fast coverage or short coverage? So 24 hours, we don't have to wait for 24 hours. 18 minutes is enough. So something in between, a little bit fake.